Hello everyone. Today we're going to learn the daily Tanya for Yud Beis Tishrei Tafshin Pei Hey. I may have said Tafshin Pei Dalet in the last video. That's a mistake. So yesterday we learned about how the most, or at least a very important part of tzedakah is zrizus, is being enthusiastic and being sort of very willing to give, and sort of being excited to give and initiating that. Today, we're going to focus on another aspect that we also brought up last time. So, let's go. Okay, so he's bringing up another thing that we see about avodat tzedakah, the work of tzedakah, the labor of tzedakah. Okay, it's going to be important later. מעלה פרטיות גדולה ונפלאה עד אין ארוך אליה, להיות מעשה הצדקה נעשה בפעמים רבות. Okay, so he's saying that the work of tzedakah should be done in a way that it's done many times, that the action of giving charity, of giving tzedakah, is performed as many times as possible. וכל המרבה הרי זה משובח, and the more the merrier. ולא בפעם אחת ובבת אחת, and not in one time. גם כי הסך הכולל אחד הוא, even if, you could give $1,000 one time, or you could give $1 1,000 times, it is far better that you give $1 1,000 times, and we're going to talk about why. כמו שכתב הרמב"ם זיכרונו לברכה בפירוש המשנה, just as the Rambam wrote in his commentary on the Mishnah, ששנו חכמים זיכרונם לברכה והכל לפי רוב המעשה. This is Pirkei Avos, and it's on a specific statement of Chachamim, where they say hakol lefi rov hama'aseh, everything is judged according to the amount of action. והנה מלבד כי הרמב"ם זיכרונו לברכה ביאר היטב טעמו ונימוקו כדי לזכך הנפש על ידי ריבוי המעשה. Okay, he's saying even though the Rambam clarified and stated very clearly the reason for this, his explanation being that what tzedakah does is it refines the soul. In other words, the giving of charity more frequently refines the soul. It makes you a charitable, generous person. So he's saying even though the Rambam sort of explicitly stated his reasoning, we're going to say another explanation, a more esoteric explanation, that is going to tie into what the Rambam said. הנה מקרא מלא דיבר הכתוב, פעולת צדקה לחיים. He's saying we have a pasuk, a verse, that tells us that פעולת צדקה לחיים, the action of tzedakah, is for life. דהיינו שפעולה וסגולתה להמשיך חיים עליונים מחיי החיים אינסוף ברוך הוא. Okay, as right, we talked about this, what tzedakah does, what the giving of charity does, the act of giving, is it, as it were, he says it here, draws life from the eternal living God down to Eretz HaChaim, right, the land of life. Hi Shechinatu Zeinu. This is the Shechina. She'alei ne'emar ve'ata mechayeh et kulam. Okay, about which it was said, and you give life to them all. V'hi Sukkah David Anafaret, right, just in time for Sukkot. The Shechina is also known as the Sukkahs David, right? So it's the Sukkah, right, of David HaMelech. It's translated as tabernacle, but it's a little bit sort of the dwelling place of King David, which has fallen. Adafa, which has fallen until the dust. Right, and as we said, that the Shekhinah has fallen to a very low place. We know this as Chazal say that when we went into captivity, the Shekhinah went with us. So let's back up. We actually spoke about this earlier, about how when upon the action of giving tzedakah, the spiritual significance of it is the sort of revelation of the light of God's wisdom, right? We discussed this as sort of the internal coherence of everything coherent. It's the reason things make sense. It's I could be understood this way maybe. It's the reason that beauty is beautiful. It's the reason that truth is true, right? It's sort of that internal aspect that sort of gives things their form, their being. And what tzedakah does is it reveals this. Now, how does it reveal this? Because the way that God generates the world is through an act of charity. And when we perform an act of charity, we reveal in the world the way that God created it. In other words, we reveal the way in which God's wisdom went from being sort of something that didn't create anything to something that is revealed. Makes sense. What does it say? כי בהתערותא דלתתא להחיות רוח שפלים דלית ליה מגרמי כלום. Right? As we explained, when we said that action below creates a stirring above, right? So the action of giving tzedakah here below, התערותא דלעילא, causes an awakening above, ובפרט בהתנדב עם להחיות יושבי ארץ החיים ממש מתהליך. And he says this is especially true when we talk about giving tzedakah to people living in Eretz Yisrael, which is sort of the most direct, or it is the physical place in the world where God's revelation occurs, or certainly where it's stable. וכל משכיל על דבר גדול ונפלא כזה, everybody who thinks about this wonderful thing, ימצא טוב טעם ודעת, he will find great wisdom. כמה גדולים דברי חכמים זיכרונם לברכה, how great are the words of חכמים, שאמרו הכל לפי רוב המעשה, that they said that everything is according to the amount of action. דהיינו מעשה הצדקה, which is to say, the action of tzedakah, הנעשה בפעמים רבות, which is performed many times, להמשיך חיים עליונים, לייחד ייחוד עליון פעמים רבות. Right? Because, so he's saying that everything is not according to the amount that you give, although that is important, right? You want to make sure that you take care of the poor. I mean, the poor person standing in front of you. But if you have a choice to give it all at once, or many, many times, and of course it doesn't matter to the poor person, let's say in this example, it's better to give it many times, because when you give it many times, you're performing this act of the revelation of God's wisdom in, within the Shekhinah. You're doing this multiple times. והיינו נמי כאין מה שכתב הרמב"ם לזכך את הנפש. And this is, and he ties it all back, and he says this is similar to what the Rambam spoke about when he said that giving tzedakah many times purifies the soul. Now, let's sort of get a picture. Well, let's actually continue a little bit, and then we'll try to get a broader picture. The Shekhinah nikret nefesh, because the Shekhinah is called nefesh. It's called our soul. Ki hi chayenu, because it is the source of our life, v'nafshenu, and of our soul. Uktiv ki shachar afar nafshenu, right? And it says, because our soul has fallen to the dust, and this is referring to the Shekhinah. Now, what we can see here is that there are basically three levels on which tzedakah happens. Okay, when one gives charity, so first of all, there's a real person in front of them, a real poor person to whom tzedakah is being given so that he might, have a better day. Then there's the second part, which is sort of internal, and that's that when we give tzedakah, we refine our own soul. We become generous people, which is just as much a service to us as it is to the poor person. Okay, and the third is that it's a service to God. There is a spiritual esoteric process that is happening that we explained is a revelation of God's transcendence in the world. Something we already spoke about. And now we're going to tie them all together. And that's why Chachamim said that tzedakah is great because it brings the redemption. To raise up the Shekhinah from the dust, little by little, ad ki yavo Shiloh, until the Mashiach comes. Now let's just understand this a little bit. If we look at these sort of three aspects, we can see that what they have in common is that they're acts of redemption. Okay, so in the case of the poor person, the redemption is more literal. You're redeeming, okay? You're redeeming this person. You're acquiring this person's freedom from poverty. That's what redemption is. Redemption is to acquire the freedom of something or someone. Okay? And that same thing happens to the soul as it is refined. And that same thing happens to the Shekhinah as the light of Chokhmah is infused into it. Okay? So it's redemption all the way down. And that's why, at least in my understanding, that's why tzedakah brings forth the redemption. So that's all for today, and we'll continue tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Take care.